Okay. Welcome to Test, ladies and gentlemen. Man, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. As you guys know, of course, we have as part of the Grand Chess Tour, we had the Superbet Rapid and Blitz coming out of Poland. And we did have Magnus Carlsen play Wesley So in round 11 of the Blitz portion. And it was a rather exciting game. Has a lot of rich, concepts and stuff like that in it. So, of course, always for my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say mabuhay to you. Let's see, Magandang Apon. It is afternoon. Magandang Araw. How you guys doing? I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who is coming from Norway, I will say God Morgan. Tusen Tak for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. I appreciate it very much, guys, man. But if you guys are ready to go, son, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got the move E4. We got D5. So we have the Scandinavian defense. Pawn takes D5, which almost always you're going to see that. It's by far the best way to play. We got Queen taking D5, which is also the other better way to play. Sometimes you'll have people kind of go off on sidelines or play like Knight F6 or something like that. Or even C6 and stuff. We do see Knight to C3, and then we have the move Queen to A5. There are definitely some other options in this position. We see Queen to D6 quite a bit. We see Queen back to D8, and then we see Queen to E5. And all of these four are by far going to be the probably like 95% of which you'll see. Pretty much at any level, but more specifically for like 2200 and above. And I mean, all the other stuff is played like very, very rarely. Just sometimes it's used to like surprise people. So of course, Magnus Carlsen probably has played it like everything. But anyways, like I said, we do see Queen to A5. We got the move D4. We got Knight to F6. Knight goes to F3. Bishop to F5. We got Bishop to D2. We got the move E6. So, I mean, both players pretty much got their pieces developed. You don't really have any good discoveries right now, because the queen could just simply back up and stuff like that. But we are eyeing this, queen through the knight. We got bishop to C4, and then black just breaks that with bishop to B4. And we got the move A3. And because the queen is not developed and is still holding this rook, you really kind of have to do something with this bishop because if you allow it to stay there, it would just be completely gone. So we do see bishop taking C3, bishop taking C3, and we got queen back to B6. And I mean, white has a slight advantage. You definitely can see that they're much further ahead in the game. They just need to get castled, and they pretty much have all their pieces out. So they have a little bit of an advantage in there. We got the move D5. Even though white's king is in the center of the board, this isn't a poorly timed pawn break. In general, yes. You don't really want to just be ripping the center open if your king is stuck in the center of the board. But like I said, white is definitely much further ahead than black. We do see knight B to D7, just making sure that we develop further, instead of just capturing and opening things up. We got pawn taking E6, bishop taking E6, bishop taking E6, queen taking E6 with check. Queen going to E2, queen takes, king takes, and we are actually still in theory. We have seen some games that have been played in this with this variation before, so this isn't brand new territory. We got castles by black, and it looks a little bit suspect for white, but white is actually doing perfectly fine. We do see rook H to E1. We got knight over to D5, and then we do have the novelty of the game now, which is bishop to D4. I believe that what we saw in the past was bishop down to D2. Both of these moves are definitely playable. You can take here. The only thing about taking on G7 is you are activating the rook on G8. As of right now, it doesn't really have, I mean, of course, it can come over here and check and the king will hide and stuff like that. But you don't want to give black more than, they really need. So that is why we see the move bishop to D4. We got the move F6, now just blending that bishop. We got the move B3 in anticipation for C5, which is what we see in the game. C5, bishop back to B2. We got knight back to B8. We're trying to bring the knight back around to like a more natural square. We do see king down to F1, and we have just pretty much artificial castled if you're white. Of course, you could just regular castle, but I mean, we kind of did like a shifting of pieces and got to it that way. But everything is everything. We do see knight to C6, rook A to D1. Knight D back to E7, and then we have a really nice move It's not like explosive or anything, but it's very positional, and it is the move G4. You know, one of the reasons that, you know, black might have moved their knight back is to, you know, bring it onto the F5 square, so it can have a little bit more influence, especially on the center on the square right here. But G4 just prevents that. We got rook taking D1, a rook taking D1. We got rook over to D8. And even though it is legitimate to trade, you know, it is more beneficial when you keep more pieces on the board, because you just kind of have more options. You have more tactics. You know, you just have, you know, more that your opponent has to think about, especially if it's like a low time game. You definitely have more for your opponent to, you know, have to, you know, consider and calculate and things like that. So it makes it a little bit more complicated. So the rook does come over to E1. The king goes to D7. And then we have another really nice move. This is the thing that you have to think about in this particular position. You have the situation where everything is, for all intents and purposes, very equal, right? You know, both players have 3 pieces, 6 pawns, and stuff like that, right? But what's one of the major differences? You know, white has a bishop and a knight against 2 knights for black. So one of the things that white is going to be trying to do is open the position up as much as possible to try to play that imbalance between bishop and knight more into their favor. If there was more pawns on the board and, you know, black can kind of lock the position up, then it would probably favor the knights. So you guys have probably heard that before. So we do see G5, and this is just an attempt to just kind of rip things open. Plus, you know, you do kind of have a tender spot on F6 if you could start getting trades rolling. We got rook over to F8, pawn takes F6, pawn takes F6. We do see a knight down to D2. And if we can successfully get into this E4 square, we actually have a nice little double attack going on. So black does their own, you know, preventive moves and stuff like that with moving F5, and this does prevent the knight from being able to jump into a really beautiful square. So we do see knight back to F3. We got the move B6. So both sides are just trying to like keep everything as solid as possible. But you see everything is fairly even. White definitely has a little bit of an advantage because the board is a little bit more open. So it is favoring white's position just a little bit, but it's not like it's just completely won. So we got knight to G5. We got the move H6. And we start to have a couple of in-between moves, some Weissenzug moves. Rook to D1 with check. We got king back to C8. And then instead of moving the knight, which is like for most people automatic, we see bishop to G7. Because why not win this rook if you can? I mean, you know, if black just wants to grab a knight, you grab a rook, right? So we got rook over to G8. We see bishop taking H6, knight down to D4. You know, black is trying to go on their own counterattack. And even though it's not absolutely the best move, it does make a lot of sense to go H4. You're just trying to hold this knight where it is. And then at some point, you know, get the bishop to move out. But we do see rook to H8, bishop goes to G7. This does allow the pawn to be captured. But we have got this really strong knight out of the middle of the board. Bishop takes D4, pawn takes D4, and then we do have a knight down to F3. And we have just double attacked the pawn in the center of the board and the rook over here, you know, like so. So we got like a little forksy going on, right? So we do have a check, you know, with black. Rook goes to H1 with check. The king goes up to E2. Rook takes D1, and then we have king taking D1. And we have actually reached a point in the game that we have a very positional concept that is in the position. And this is what Magnus Carlsen decides that he wants to play. If you want to go ahead and pause the video and try to guess and see what move this is, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So I think that like a lot of people actually would probably try to get this because like if you're black, you automatically notice that you're losing this D4 pawn, right? Like there's not, you know, like a great way to defend it because white is a little bit faster at getting to the pawn than black would be at defending it. And it is under fire right now as far as this, you know, knight attacking it right now. So if we thought about it, you know, the knight, this knight might, you know, possibly come over here and defend. The king would come up, king would go down, king would come up, and the king would only make it as far as here before you were able to just snap it off the board. So there really isn't a good way for you to defend it in the position that we have now. And so you have two options. You can just literally just give the pawn up for nothing on D4, or you can try to do something that's going to inconvenience white just a little bit. And I mean, some players might kind of go for, you know, what you got, you know, because, you know, hey, I'm going to get something, you know, I'm going to get the pawn, right? So we see the move D3. If you did guess D3, you would be absolutely correct. Because, I mean, if you're going to lose material, you want to try to do it in like the fashion that, you know, inconveniences your opponent as much as possible. So, of course, even though it is a move in the position to just capture here, if you notice, you know, white has just like separated their pawn structure a little bit. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. You're probably still going to be able to, you know, try to grind this home for a win as white. But you're just going to have to, you know, you kind of made it just a little bit more difficult for yourself. So you need to have a little bit more technique in the position. So Wesley So decides that he does not want to do that. Even though he's very capable, he decides that he wants to preserve his pawn structure the way it is and just like casually walk up and grab this pawn. So he actually goes c4. It makes a lot of sense. So like I said, black doesn't really have a good way of defending this pawn. It's going to drop at some point, but like I said, white has preserved their structure as much as possible. So we do see knight to c6, king goes to d2, and then we have a counterattack on a5. So this knight is not rim on the grim. But we do see the move knight to d4, and then no matter what you do, you're going to be winning this pawn next move, which is what we see. King to d7, king takes d3, we got king down to d6. So as you can see, you know, white has definitely won a pawn. They're in a much better position, and they're going to be grabbing another pawn very soon. After we see b4, knight goes back to b7, knight takes f5 with check, and we have gotten 2 entire extra pawns if you are white. And so 98% of the time, if you are up 2 pawns in positions, you know, it's going to be winning. There are those exceptions, of course, but for the most part, especially you have this outside pass pawn over here, it's kind of, you know, a done deal. We got king over to e5, hoping that white forgets about their knight, but he doesn't. Knight to d4. We got the move a5. Knight goes down to e2. Pawn takes b4. Pawn takes b4. And we got knight back to d8. We got f4 with check. The king goes over to f5. We see king to e3. And you have to be a little bit careful in this position if you are black, because there are certain moves that you really don't want to make. One of them is knight to c6. This allows the forced trade of the knights, which is what you absolutely do not want to do. Also, one of the mine squares is knight to e6, and it would be the same thing. You don't want to, you know, get in positions where you'll trade pieces, because as you can see, white has a 3-to-1 pawn majority in the board. So, I mean, that's not going to benefit you at all. So the king goes to e3, and then we see the king backing up to e6. But you see that it's really easy for white to just start infiltrating into the position and pushing further forward. So we see king to e4, knight goes to f7, we see knight to d4 with check, king goes to d6, the king steps up to f5. And like I said, you see that white has no problem getting further and further up the board, and black is really, you know, they're really not able to really do anything about it. The knight goes down to h6, and this is like absolutely a spite check. The king goes over to g5, knight goes back to g8, we see knight to f5 with check. The king goes to e6. We see knight down to e3 again. So as you notice, like when you're making some of these knight moves, you're moving the knight under the pawn, and so you're able to push the pawn with support of the knight. That is usually the configuration that you want. When you do have a passed pawn, you usually want your knight behind it so that, you know, the knight can help the pawn push forward. And then, I mean, especially let's say the king is like off or something, right? You know, if you're in a situation where, let's say this knight is not there too, right? You know, and then you're pushing this pawn, you know, black doesn't really have a good way of coming and attacking this knight without leaving this pawn capable of running. So that's just one of the subtle, in-game concepts that we have. So we got knight to f6 coming down. We see the move f5, king goes to f7. We see king down to f4, knight goes to d7. And you're still trying to be really careful to not put the king and the knight in too wrong of a spot. We got knight over to g4, and we got knight back to b8. And this is very unfortunate because this does absolutely trap the knight. It not only traps the knight, but it forces a trade of the knights. And this is exactly like what Wesley So goes into. We see the move b5, and so you notice that the knight can't come to either one of these two squares. And you really don't want to go to this square, because what's going to happen? Knight's going to go to e5 with check, and then that's the done deal, right? We see king to e7, and then we do see that knight to e5. And as you can see, there is nothing that black is able to do in this position other than really just kind of move their king around. But like I said, you know, you're either going to force the trade of knights going to knight to c6 if the king steps down like that, or you're simply just, I mean, there's really just nothing else for black to do. There's a king movement somewhere like so, or there is, you know, the knight moving here. But if the king moves here, you're just pushing this pawn and stuff like that. So there's just, like I said, you're just completely paralyzed if you're black. So it is in this position that Magnus Carlsen resigns the game. So Wesley So gets his win. So Malakas C. Wesley. So in this one, And yeah, I appreciate. Even though it kind of seemed like the game was like the pieces that got traded down and everything was kind of boring. There was a lot of life kind of in this end game as far as different positional concepts and stuff like that. So I think it was pretty interesting. I'm a real chess head though. So, but I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, and I'll see you guys next time.